Hey everyone, Andy here. Attached to this episode, I've included a full interview with one of my own personal podcasting heroes who's running a Kickstarter. His name's Chris Mancini. He's from the podcast The Comedy Film Nerds, and his Kickstarter is called The Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master. I will let Chris talk about it in full in this interview. I just wanted to make this interview available as a separately downloadable file. Once again, you can find it in the show notes here, the Kickstarter, Rise the Kung Fu Dragon Master, and please enjoy this interview. Chris Mancini, another one of my personal podcasting heroes. He is one of the only men on IMDb that has 2 scripts credited for the same movie, a comedy script and a horror script for an amazing little film called Asylum that ended up exactly as Chris, the writer, thought it would when he started writing it. Correct, Chris?
Yeah, exactly. I thought, oh, what could go wrong here? Low budget horror script, moving the production to Bulgaria. You know, this will be exactly what my vision, what I intended.
Right. And he's here today to talk about something that he actually has complete creative control over, a special little project. Chris, do you want to get talking about that?
Absolutely, but I will, in case people haven't seen the movie Asylum, I'll just mention that basically what happened was the production company bought the script, moved the production to Bulgaria, threw away the script. The production went rogue. They destroyed the movie. They brought it back to me to fix it back in LA. So the only way I could do it was to make it a comedy and like a mystery science theater thing as people made fun of the footage. And the production company said, okay, so I put it in. I brought some other podcasters in, like Mike Schmidt, Dean Haglund, and we had fun with it. And then they ruined it again and took out a lot of the jokes and never rebranded it as a horror comedy. So the way I tell people is that, like, well, we made lemonade twice, but they made lemons 3 times. So,
right. Wasn't it, I remember you saying on the podcast that listeners were seeing it in, like, HBO in, like, Colombia.
Oh my God, it went everywhere. This movie is still getting released. That's what fascinates me. I'm like, well, wouldn't you bury it if it's at some point? But nope. It ended up like on some of the horror channels. It was like on DVD in Japan as SWAT versus Devil. I mean, they just keep releasing this movie. And the comedy fans that know the story really enjoy it and find it, you know, entertaining because they know what happened. The horror fans that get tricked into seeing it, not knowing what it is, are furious. What is this? I didn't sign up for this. Which I get. That was the whole point of rebranding it, that they didn't do.
People looking up Chris Mancini on IMDb and just reading some of the reviews for Asylum, I highly recommend it. They are very split down the line, and it's wonderful to read that.
Yep. Tricked horror fan. Oh, comedy film nerds fan. You could see the difference.
Yeah.
So the new project, which I'm really excited about, is, again, like you said, actual creative control because it's a graphic novel. And it is called Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master, and it's an action comedy about a small-time crook in Los Angeles who's angry and just wants to fight all the time. He's part of a fight club. He gets mixed up in an ancient battle between good and evil that's been fought since the days of ancient China. So it's got a little Army of Darkness, a little Bulletproof Monk, little Big Trouble in Little China, like all these really cool things. And I really wanted to kind of put together what would happen if somebody modern, like in our day and age, and it's very easy to get angry now, the way our society and media kind of cultivates that anger. But what if you're angry all the time and you just want to fight about everything all the time, and you're introduced to these ancient philosophies from China about kung fu and peace and the warrior's way? Like, how would that actually interact? Would you reject it? Would you finally be on the path to peace? And how would that what would that look like? And then, you know, of course, I had to add a bunch of jokes, epic fights, dragons, monsters, and, you know, surly baristas.
Now, to get the background for a bunch of this Eastern philosophies, did you speak with anyone who's intimately familiar and very bearded?
I did indeed. You must be speaking of our Kung Fu consultant, Rick Myers, who we do the Kung Fu movie extravaganza with every year at Comic-Con. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to need some help with this. So he came on board, and he's helping me with the script, and he's going to also help, you know, when all the drawings get done. And he's been like an invaluable resource. He has his own podcast, Action Film Autopsy, and he's just been doing this for years and years and years and years. And every time I talk to him about martial arts and kung fu, I learn something from him. Everything from the philosophy to the history. It's been fascinating.
Yeah, listeners, if you are into kung fu or martial arts films in general, Rick Myers is a wonderful man to just listen to talk about anything. He can explain why a certain movie works as a kung fu movie or why it doesn't work. It's such a great pleasure. Your yearly Comic-Con episodes with him, Chris. It's
Yeah, it's
fascinating.
fantastic. And even I we will still be doing those shows with him, even though Comedy Film Nerds is ending. We're still going to be going and doing the panels down there with him for sure. At least I definitely will be. I'm not sure about Graham, but he said he would. So we'll see. Depends. Next year's an election year, so he might be pretty busy.
Right. Oh, Graham might end up dead in a ditch from an aneurysm or something out of anger. Like, how much of this do you have completed? Just out of curiosity.
Have the entire script and layouts entirely completed down to every page. It's going to be exactly 160 pages. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that is because it was very hard to judge just a regular script, to tell the artist how many pages it was going to be. Because I made that mistake with Long Ago and Far Away, estimated the page count, and I was way off. And the artist, Fernando Pinto, was very generous because it was my first book, and he just did the extra pages, as part of the overall book. But this time he's like, can you kind of give me a more accurate page count? I said, absolutely. So the script is done. The page layouts, as far as the script go, are done. The only thing that's not done, and the only thing, it's a comic book, the art, the coloring, and the lettering. So the rather large part of the book is not done yet. And that's actually what we're funding. We're asking the money for. I'm not taking any money. I play the long game on these projects. I really want to see it get picked up and people enjoy it, and then go on from there. This money is to basically pay the other artists. It's not me. So it's going to go to Fernando Pinto, the artist, the letterers, the editor, and for the physical costs of printing and shipping. So it is a larger ask. It's 35,000, but it's 160 pages. So it needs to be a little higher to get everyone paid and to get it actually made. So it's more of a gamble, but I'm hoping all of the fans will come together and we can get it done.
Yeah, yeah. You have had some experience with Kickstarter before. That's been very. It was stressful just to follow as a
Yes.
listener.
This is my fourth one, and I've had three successful Kickstarters, and every single one has been a huge amount of work and a huge amount of stress, and they've been all very difficult. So I'm hoping this last one will go out on a high note and a bang and actually get it funded. So that's why I'm pushing really, really hard. We've got Comedy Film Nerds coming to a close. The last studio show for Comedy Film Nerds is going to be the last day of the Kickstarter. So I'm December 10th. I'm really, really trying to get that win in before we move on to other things. But every single one is stressful. Every time I do a Kickstarter, when it's over, I go, that's it. I'm never doing another one of these again. And then, a year or two later, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll do another Kickstarter. I always see them as one of two things. This is going to be a great beginning and open up new possibilities, or this is the absolute last straw.
Right. So, so there's not going to be any 24-hour telethon to raise money and save comedy filmers at the last second.
You know what? A couple fans actually suggested that. They were like, they wanted to do a Save CFN site and another Patreon, and I said, look, we really appreciate that, but it's been a decade. We're ready to move on. We've done a podcast, a website, a movie, a book, and a festival. We're gone as far as we can, so we're gonna move on to other things.
Yeah, Chris, do you want to talk about the other major Kickstarter you did? Is a specific film of sorts.
Yes, it was Earbuds, the podcasting documentary, and we funded honestly through the podcasting fans. That you guys, podcasting fans are the best. The Comedy Film Nerds fans, everybody, came on board. We traveled all over the world, interviewed people to find out about that connection between podcaster and fan, what made it so special. And it did get picked up. It's distributed, so you could grab it anywhere. You could get it at iTunes, Amazon Prime, wherever you find on-demand movies, it'll be there. So you could definitely check it out. And it's still going strong. Like, people are discovering it like a year or two later, going, oh, I didn't know this was here. This was amazing. And It doesn't matter that some of the podcasts we interviewed, they may not be podcasting anymore. It was a moment in time, but all the emotions and thoughts and feelings, everything's real, and that doesn't go out of date. That really is. So it's even you can really enjoy the movie, even though comedy film nerds may not be there by the time you see it, or we don't have the festival anymore. It doesn't matter because that connection that is the heart of the movie will always be there.
Right. Now, your other comic book that you kickstarted long ago and far away.
Yes.
Do you, first of all, it's so funny.
Oh, thank you.
Could you give the listeners just a little clip about what it is? Because the Geek 101 listeners you guys would really like this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's basically a Narnia meets Clerks. As we know, the Narnia story, a kid goes into this alternate world as a kid and fights the witch and saves the land and comes back happy. But this is what happens if that kid then all of a sudden turns 30. He runs a comic book store. He's kind of an asshole, and then he has to go back into that world again as an adult, and then he just makes things worse because he's such a jerk. So that's kind of the premise and the setup of this movie, of this comic book. Hopefully, a movie someday. And it's ultimately a redemption story. It's a big epic fantasy story with jokes and elves and ghosts and witches and hobgoblins. But at its core, I always wanted to make it a very personal story too, about recovering your inner child and your inner optimism. And if you've lost your way as a person in the world, how can you regain it and how can you get that back and get yourself back on track?
Yeah, I have to say the depiction of depression within that story is really, I feel like it's really accurate and really easy to be like, oh yeah, I have been in this spot emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's everything we write is autobiographical, whether we want it to be or not. So we put a little piece of us in every single story that we write and create. And the good news on this one is it is available multiple places. It's available at the Comedy Film Nerd site if you want to sign a graphic novel. That'll be open until December 15th. But if you just want digital, you could go to Comixology under Starburns Press. They picked it up, and you can get the individual issues. Like if you're not sure, I'm like, well, let me get the first issue first. It's only $1.99. You can check it out. There's 8 issues. And in fact, I just had a meeting with them today. We are packaging it to pitching it as a TV show. So we're hoping that it does get picked up next year in another form.
Right. And it ends with kind of a cliffhanger. Is there any hope for, a long ago and farther away?
Indeed, yes. I mean, my plan with both of these properties, with Long Gone Far Away and Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master, is they're both 3-volume sets. Like Long Gone Far Away, Volume 1 is out now. There's going to be Volume 2. It'll be called Son of Elvenwood. And then it'll be Volume 3, which will kind of wrap everything up. And then Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master will be Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master. And then Fall of the Kung Fu Dragon Master. And then Return of the Kung Fu Dragon Master. I'm trying to follow those classic sequel titles. And then there would be a 7th book where they actually combine and it's a crossover and they meet each other.
So a Mancini Avengers.
Yes, exactly. That's the Mancini Cinematic Universe, or the comic book universe for sure.
So you interacted with Starburns. I feel like most of our listeners might not know Starburns, but would be a fan of Starburns Publishing, right?
Yes.
That's Dino's, right?
That is Dino. That is Dan Harmon. The production company does Rick and Morty, Moral Oral, and Anomalisa and Animals that was on HBO. But the publishing arm is really, really cool. They're doing a lot of digital first. There's Invasion from WrestleTopia, Griffin, which is like a really fun space adventure. And there's Helicious, which is about a girl from hell who just hangs out and becomes friends with like a punk rocker who's dead. There's a lot of really cool offbeat stuff there, and it's just expanding. It's a new platform and it's a new publishing arm for them. And that's one of the reasons people ask is like, well, why are you kickstarting if you're already with a publisher? Because it's a new imprint, and each department, if you know anything about the way entertainment works, they have their own budgets, and this is like one of the biggest things they've done. and they couldn't fund it all themselves. So we're all kind of pooling resources to get it done, and then it will go out under Starburns Press when it's done. But if you Kickstart it, you get a lot of really cool goodies that you wouldn't get normally, like everything from like the Starburns digital library. You could get a tour of Starburns. You could be on the last Comedy Film Nerds show. There's a lot of, we tried to put in a ton of really cool rewards that were very exclusive just to Kickstarter to really sweeten the deal and sweeten the pot a little.
Right. I mean, if any listener wants to really invest a tour of Starburns, might be able to sneak in and meet Dan Harmon.
It's possible.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I just really wanted to, one, have an excuse to interact with you before Comedy Film Nerds dies, which has been a staple of my life for the past, at least since 2011.
Let's use the word retires. So.
Retires. Okay. Yes. When it goes off to greener pastures and goes into the room from Soylent Green.
Yeah. When it goes to the farm, that's it.
Yeah. Please, listeners, just check it out on Kickstarter. $20 does get you a digital copy. And, unlike other Kickstarters, at least Long Go and Farther Away has, when I Kickstarted with them or when I Kickstarted for Earbuds, constant updates.
Yes.
That is something that other Kickstarters have definitely neglected and just kind of left. But I'll say, I'll vouch for you, Chris, that every step of the way there's an update.
Absolutely. We like to keep people informed. Look, they're trusting you with, their money. And, everyone who pledges their money, I take that very seriously. They need to know, that everything's getting made and everything's on track. Even if there's a delay, I'm always honest about stuff. So, I respect and I'm grateful for every single pledge.
And before we go, is there any recommendations you have for listeners as far as just geek culture? Have you been watching The Mandalorian?
Of course. Yeah, The Mandalorian's great. I like doing a deep dive if you're going into Disney Plus. Go into like the older movies. Like they're not all up there yet, but stuff like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Treasure Island. It's like watching, like I grew up with them as a kid, but if you've never seen them, it's like literally watching a time machine. Like, oh, this is how movies were made back then, especially family movies. And some of the stuff is like really like, oh, they got away with that on a G or a PG rating, and other stuff is like, wow, the pacing could really pick up about now.
Yeah. I actually discussed 20,000 Leagues an episode ago as one of my hidden gems because James Mason's always great, and Peter Lorre. It's just that was one of my movies as a kid that I would rent from Blockbuster and wear out watching over and over again.
Oh my God, yeah, me too. It was one of my favorites. In fact, I was really sad that they got rid of the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea ride from Disneyland and Disney World. I'm like, I loved that ride.
Yeah, didn't they replace it with a Finding Nemo?
Yeah, they did at Disneyland, although Disney World, they got rid of it completely. So there's like, at least Finding Nemo, you could kind of, reminisce about where the track was and where the sea monster was and, the all that stuff. But it's, I always used to love that ride as a kid. Now, I'll ask you a trivia question about 20,000 Leagues and Finding and Captain Nemo. Did Captain Nemo appear in any other stories after 20,000 Leagues?
Wasn't he in one of Jules Verne's Mysterious Island or something?
Yes, very good. And he had to put him in there because people loved that character so much. Like it was like one of the first kind of fans clamoring for a sequel. They wanted him back into another story. So he actually wrote him into Mysterious Island. Yeah.
Chris, out of curiosity, have you been watching the HBO Watchmen?
I have not yet, and just because I'm kind of behind on all this other stuff, I just finished The Boys, and I want to say something about that show. And it was one of those shows that I really thought, oh God, it's all going to be, dumb superhero jokes and violence, and it's just not going to mesh. Like I'm always a little wary of kind of like quote meta superhero shows. But The Boys is the real deal. It's fantastic. I mean, I really like it. It avoids all of those pitfalls. It becomes commentary, satire, great characters, great story, and they really weaved a really interesting story. Now I can't wait for season 2.
Yeah, I mentioned this when we covered The Boys earlier in the year, but my dental assistant mentioned it. A 50-year-old lady just kind of mentioned like, oh, I've been watching Amazon's The Boys. It's really interesting. So
That's great.
yeah, it's fascinating to see something like that getting to a wider audience. But just really quick with Watchmen, and there's a small tied into 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The Watchmen show is a sequel to the comic book, so there
Right.
is the giant squid,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and
Yep. Good.
yeah, and just they had this very subtle nod to a support group for people who are terrified of extra dimensional beings, and they're called the Friends of Nemo.
Ah, that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah. All right, Chris. Thank you so much for giving me your time and talking with me, and getting a chance to do something cool like this Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master. I'm super excited to read it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the support, and thanks for supporting Comedy Film Nerds too. You've been a Patreon backer for a while now. Thanks again.
Yeah, yeah. All right, you have a good one.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Bye. Okay, that was the interview. Listeners, if you could go check out Kickstarter, Rise of the Kung Fu Dragon Master, there will be links in the show notes, and I will be tweeting them out. This was a really great, fun experience for me to kind of get to talk to one of the people, that I would not be here podcasting if it was not for Chris Mancini and the Comedy Film Nerds. So I've had two of my personal podcasting heroes on the show, and that was really awesome, and it really did mean a lot to me. So, and check out Long Ago and Far Away if the premise of the book sounded interesting to you. That's all we have for today. Class is dismissed.